Hello, and welcome to Dead Ideas in Teaching and Learning, a higher education podcast from the Center for Teaching and Learning at Columbia University. I'm Amanda Irvin, the Center's Executive Director. In this podcast series, we explore dead ideas in teaching and learning, beliefs that, despite being untrue, continue to shape educational systems and practices. These outdated notions, as Diane Pike described, perpetuate the tyranny of dead ideas. Join us as we challenge these misconceptions and explore innovative approaches to higher education. Welcome, everyone. I'm speaking today with Dr. Justin Shaffer. Justin is the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies and a teaching professor at the Colorado School of Mines. He's the author of the book High Structure Course Design, which gives practical hands-on advice for creating STEM courses that engage students in and out of the classroom. He's an award-winning educator who has taught 8,500 plus students since 2012 in chemical engineering and the biological sciences, and researches on the efficacy of course design and related topics. Justin is the founder of Recombinant Education, where he provides professional development to faculty and administrators on evidence-based course design strategies in order to improve student outcomes. Justin, welcome to our Dead Ideas podcast. We're super thrilled that you're with us today.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, me too. So I'm excited for our conversation today because we're going to unpack one of my very favorite dead ideas, which is you can't do active learning in large lecture halls. And I hear you've got some strategies and tips in your new book, High Structure Course Design, which we'll talk about too. So let's get into it. It seems like we both agree active learning is possible in large classes and lecture halls. But to set the stage, can you walk me through this dead idea and why it's so pervasive? So why do people think that active learning isn't possible in large lecture halls?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I'm really happy to unpack this too. So, my background, I've always been at big schools. I went to college at Penn State, PhD at University of Washington, Seattle, taught at big schools, North Carolina, UC Irvine, so I know what these big classes are like on both sides. And it can be pretty intimidating to have all those people in the room, right? So at UC Irvine, my biggest class ever was 440 students. I like to think of that as 880 eyeballs, just staring at me, bleeding daggers, whatever it might be, and that could be intimidating for me as the faculty, because right, how am I going to handle this big room? And then also for the students too, though, right? For them to raise their hand, ask a question, for them to get involved and speak up. There's hundreds of their peers in there, and that could be intimidating. So I think the reasons why faculty don't do this is, one, we tend to teach how we were taught. And, I've been doing this for, 13 years or so now. And when I first started teaching, I remember those big lectures I had, and they were primarily didactic, right? Lectures. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's how you do it. So I think it's kind of considered to be the norm. But then when you want to try new things too, and you want to try active learning in these rooms, again, the number of eyeballs and fingers in there is just overwhelming. And you're kind of, and I was too, kind of afraid of how it's going to go. My first day of teaching 400 students back in North Carolina, I was visibly shaking for the first 5-10 minutes. Like, you could probably see it from the back row, and then, there's so many people in the room, so many things can go wrong when you try an active learning activity with that many and it falls flat. It's like, oh gosh, the feeling of just ineptitude is just drastic, so I think there's just that scale of it. And then there's other more practical things too, like, well, how do I assess it? How do I grade their participation? How do I get everybody doing it? Right. There's just, again, there's so many people in there. Do I need technology? Do I need resources, people? And we can talk about some strategies to do this later. So yeah, so I think, yeah, it's partly practical, logistical, like it's just too many. And then, but part of it's kind of like a fear based almost, and about why people might not want to try these types of active learning in the larger rooms.
That makes sense. I mean, they're overwhelming. Even to walk through those rooms when they're empty, you're sort of like, ooh, there's a lot of gravitas in this space, And so when it's full and you're trying to scan the room and assess interest and see who's activated, which brains are on, and it's a lot. It's a lot to do. So, all right, so you've taught classes from 10 to 440 students, or as you put it, 880 eyeballs. So how did you do it? Like, how did you work your way through this dead idea and start to do active learning in large spaces?
Yeah, so like I said, I was, scared to death at the beginning, really nerve-wracking doing that. Even when I first taught, and before that, I taught about, 70 in the room, which some of you listening probably would consider to be a large class. Here at Colorado School of Mines, a lot of my colleagues think, 50 or 60 is considered large or bigger, which honestly I think is kind of cute because again, I got experience with the big ones. But, even when you teach 70, 80, whatever around there, that's still a lot of bodies in the room, a lot of people to work with. But how I got started and how I do this and why is because I was trained to do this. Okay. So I did a postdoc called Spire at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where I was trained in evidence-based teaching practices, and which is kind of abnormal for faculty, right? We oftentimes don't get a lot of training. As we're recording this right now, it's back to school week for a lot of people. And, you get that new faculty orientation, you might get some exposure to evidence-based teaching practices, but that might be it, right? There's no certification or training, but my postdoc did provide that. So I got, formal training over a couple of years of how to do this kind of stuff. And again, we use the evidence. So for me, trained as a chemical engineer, a bioengineer, a molecular biologist, I like to think as a STEM guy, well, there's data out there, I should follow it, right? And that's true of teaching. And the data on active learning is out there, right? So you start with Scott Freeman's 2014 paper in PNAS, which was that big meta-analysis showing the benefits of active learning versus more didactic classrooms. You also see a follow-up paper he did looking at how active learning can close achievement or performance gaps between students, right? So there's a lot of testimonials anecdotally, but also hard studies that show this can be beneficial to student performance. So when I first started teaching, I'm like, okay, well, this must be the way to do it. Right? Even though, again, as I said earlier, when I was a college student, I didn't have that really. It was mostly didactic lecture. I wanted to try to use these techniques what I was trained in and trying to hone my skills there over the years, which definitely you get better over time, you feel more comfortable. And that's also an important point to make as we get in this conversation is that active learning is going to look a little bit different for everybody. There's no one way to do it. There's no one prescribed way to teach with active learning. Everyone has a different niche to fill. Everyone has a different style and personality as an instructor. One example of this, when I walk around the room and I'm a big walker, I get my steps in during class, all the students are talking to each other, they're doing their stuff or whatever. I just walk around and listen. I don't talk to them. I don't sit down with them. I have a colleague though, I know that he'll sit down, look them right in the eye and say, hey, what do you think the answer is, Amanda? Tell me. I'm like, oh, I could never do that, right? I got too much social anxiety. You ask me to return something at Target, I have a minor heart attack. So like, I can't have those small conversations in the lecture all impromptu. So that's my style, right? I also like short and sweet. I do, 30-second, 1 minute active learning activities. I don't do, 20, 30-minute ones. Sometimes I will, but I tend to do these short ones because again, that's just more my style. I like the short check-ins with the students, see how they're doing. So again, you got to tailor these approaches to what works for you. You don't have to emulate what someone says. You have to do it this way, and absolutely not. You got to twist it and make it work. And that's only going to help with using active learning in large lectures because comfort is important. Making the community is important. And if you're trying to force things, you got the more students in there, 100 plus, right? It's going to have a higher chance, I think, of failing. So you got to feel comfortable about it and make sure it fits your style.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think that's really empowering for folks who you're at back to school week. We're going to be back to school and oh gosh, it's less than a couple weeks. It's at the time that we're recording this. Time flies, It's empowering because we want to engage our students. And it's making me think, Justin, that maybe we should have started with thinking about like when we say active learning, I think you and I might have ideas of what that means in our heads. And maybe we could offer some definitions or some talking points of like, what are we talking about when we say like, is this possible in a large lecture hall or is this not possible? Because the things that make it onto like admissions recruitment videos or like all of the students are out of their seats or like everybody's outside or, you've got 300 people and they're all lined up around the room. And certainly that active learning can look like that. But also it can look like everybody is working individually and like doing a like, let's all write down the most important thing that we learned today. Because for me, active learning has always been about, I'll just share what my working definition is, activating the brain, like what's happening between students' ears. And a lot of times we do that by getting them to engage with their peers or encouraging engagement with the instructor, encouraging engagement with the content, but we want their brains to be active. They don't necessarily have to be like up and moving around or you have to take class outside. What's your sort of like elevator, here's what active learning is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's as long as you got those gears turning, pencil on paper, whatever it takes to get to that point, it is what it is, right? Yeah. So as long as you're engaged in the process. So, and you can use this in terms of examples, right? You're doing problems, you're doing case studies, data analysis, group work, individual work, practice quiz, whatever. There's a variety of ways to do it. But again, it's about, like you said, what's going on between their ears individually. Are you engaged with the learning? Now, listening to a lecture, that is engaging, right? That is a skill that is required and you need to cultivate and develop. But being a little bit more active than that, and being a little more engaged as opposed to that more passive didactic lecture, I think that's important. And you're right, it doesn't have to be people up out of their seats in groups, moving around on whiteboards or anything. I do that sometimes, like my anatomy and physiology class here, I have about 80 in it sometimes. We'll go outside. I got them doing jumping jacks and push-ups and they measure their heart rates and stuff, right? So that's pretty active, right? But on the other hand, exactly what you said. Do it individually at your seats. Take 1 minute. Write down what was the most confusing thing from the last 5 minutes of lecture, right? Or what's the most important thing you learned here? Then you trade that with your neighbor and kind of reflect on each other's work, right? And I love that you brought that individual idea up because that's something I really emphasize with faculty too, is that active learning can be loud and boisterous in group, but can also be quiet and individual. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. There's even a tool that measures this for you. So while we're on the topic, Kimberly Tanner and Melinda Owens, Kimberly's at San Francisco State and Melinda's at UC San Diego. And they developed this tool called DART, the Decibel Analysis Research Tool. So you can take your phone, set it up in your classroom on the front of the podium, hit record for the audio. Then when your class is over, you upload that audio file to their website. And it does a few things. Well, if it hears lots of voices talking, that's active learning. If it hears a single voice, that's probably you lecturing or your students asking questions. That's not active learning. But if it hears silence, it's also codifies it as active learning, right? And then it will spit out a number. Okay, for today, you did 52% of the time active learning, something like that. And here's like the timestamps when you did it. So it's a really fun tool you can check out and use. But again, yeah, active learning looks so different for everybody. And yeah, it's going to look different in a 10-person class versus a 440-person class, but it's still active learning. It's still engaging.
I wasn't aware of that tool, though I'm a big fan of their work. What a cool way to check how the class went in relation to your memory of the class, right? So when I have observed classes that are using active learning, or I have tried to do it myself, I have always been very aware that I think so many students are talking, right? Like so many students are involved in class discussion. And then a colleague who's observing me is like, it was actually just was the same 4 students over and over again. And that's pretty well documented, right? That we have the perception as instructors of like, this is going well and we're really moving and grooving. And then we have this little reality check of like, is it really the same students, or maybe it is a really boisterous classroom, but being able to play that back, because when we're in front of classrooms or we're facilitating learning in classrooms from any position, there's so much going on cognitively for us to be able to like look back down the mountain and think like, how did that go? There's too much going on up there. So I imagine that when it comes to active learning in large spaces or in any space, that you might have some tips or strategies in your new book, High Structure Course Design. And I have to ask first, can you tell us what is high structure course design? And then maybe tell us a little bit about what kinds of support or strategies folks who pick it up might find.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, high structure course design, as you said, I wrote the book on it, but I didn't come up with that. So I got to give credit where it's due. So that's Mary Pat Wenderoth and Scott Freeman again, University of Washington, Seattle. They're both emeritus teaching professors there now in biology. But about 20 years ago, they started publishing papers on the importance of structure and scaffolding in student course design and student learning. They found that when they added more supports and carefully walk students through the learning process, what happens before class, during class, and after class, they saw benefits. So we break down the high structure model where we start with backward design, and that's where we first start with our objectives. What do we want our students to be able to do? Then we design assessments that can measure whether or not students can achieve those objectives. Then last, we have all our activities, in class, out of class, book, whatever, that's going to help give students practice so they do well in the assessment, which measures their ability to achieve the learning objectives. But in the high structure model, we take backward design, we break it up in explicit 3 buckets: pre-class, during class, and after class, right? So there's going to be some kind of pre-class content acquisition, reading, watching videos, pre-recorded lectures, whatever. Also pre-class formative assessment, so some kind of accountability, maybe a pre-class quiz, maybe an entry ticket you bring into class and turn in, something to hold students accountable for the pre-class work. Then you build on that. So in class, you're going to do, again, active learning. You're going to have students engage in the learning process in a variety of ways. Are you going to lecture though? Absolutely, right? I'm not an anti-lecture guy. I am a choosy lecture guy though. I do want people to choose their spots of when they're talking. And I like to think about it like this, so if you're lecturing for 50 minutes, are your students going to learn? Absolutely, yes, they are. But are there other things you can add on top of that, such as active learning, to help them learn even better? Yes, they are. That's true too, and we can explore that, right? All right, so we're going to have this mix, kind of this almost interactive lecturing format that someone like Todd Zakrajik might talk about, right? So back and forth, lecture, activities, a nice mix of things. And then after class, students are going to review, typically on a weekly basis. We have some kind of online review assignment, maybe an online quiz, a draft item of a report or an essay, a last year's exam to practice from, something like that to hold students accountable. And then lastly, with the high structure, we usually have frequent summative assessment. So we're trying to move away from what I had in college 20 years ago, that one midterm, one final model, and have maybe monthly exams. Maybe you do quizzes every 2 weeks, maybe even quizzes every week, right? The literature is pretty strong on that. The more frequent summative assessment, like weekly quizzes, yields better student outcomes because they get more practice. Students also tend to like it better, right? They get more opportunities for practice and they don't have these giant high stakes, make or break it type exams anymore. So that's a little bit about the high structure model and where it came from. But yeah, when you're doing active learning, then some tips I could think of, especially for large lectures, right? So again, you can totally do it when someone says, I got 100 students, 200 students, I can't do active learning. I say, sure you can. We just got to twist and tweak in what you think about it. Because as we were saying earlier, there's a lot of different ways to approach active learning activities. So, if you're doing this in a small class, 20 or 30, maybe you have these worksheets that students turn in and you're going to grade them. Maybe you have students come up to the front of the class and present what they're working on during the class. Maybe you're going around to the whiteboards and checking their work during class. That's a lot harder to do with 300, right? So you're going to just do things a little bit differently. So as I said earlier, I like these little short, quick active learning activities. So one thing you can do no matter what size is just simple pausing, right? And we kind of mentioned this already. Just, all right, does anyone have any questions? Raise your hands. And you might get crickets, right? You're not going to get any hands. Okay, well, take out your notes for 30 seconds, write down what was the most important thing, or what was the muddiest point, what was the most confusing thing from the last 5 minutes of lecture, right? That's active learning, individual quick writing. Okay, maybe instead, okay, I'm going to pose a question about, whatever heart valve function for me in A&P. Who can tell me the reason why? And you get crickets. Okay, well, turn to your neighbor. Okay, now turn to your neighbor, take 30 seconds, 1 minute, talk about it. And now let's ask for responses. I guarantee you get some more hands. I learned that trick from Rich Felder at North Carolina State when I was starting my career about 15 years ago. But that's a think, pair, share, right? You can do some things like that. Also leverage technology. I think once you hit, I don't know, even 40, using some kind of polling system is wonderful, clicker systems, especially when you get to the hundreds, you get triple digits. I think clicker systems are essential to manage those classes. But when you're using a system, whatever polling software you like that's out there, right? There's a ton of companies that do it, but you get data, right? And that's what's so important about these systems, especially with large classes. And like you said earlier, Amanda, right? You walk in that room, it's hard to tell kind of who's into it, who's connected, who's engaged, who's not. But with the clickers, you get the data, right? So you can see, all right, if I got 400 students and I ask a question and 98% get it right, that's awesome, right? We're on the right track. We're not going to just say that was, too easy though, because there's some people that didn't get it right. So we want to acknowledge that and make sure everyone understands. But will we get that data? On the other hand, let's say only 20% get it right. Oof, okay, what happened? Did I screw up in the lecture? Did they not prepare ahead of time with class? I can then pivot. So that's what I love about clicker systems, especially with large classes. You can use the data to pivot. So you can figure out, how are they doing? Okay, we're on the right path. We can keep going. Or again, we get an oof moment. Okay, let me lecture about this a different way. Let me try to have you talk to each other to explain it. Maybe I Google a quick YouTube video to explain it a different way, right? So you can pivot on the fly with data with clickers in these big classrooms. Also, right, assessment can be a little bit different of active learning. So again, maybe during a small class, you're able to collect those worksheets or in the moment have them present or walk around and see what they're doing in groups. And maybe in this model though, you have them take a picture of their work on their page, upload it to their LMS, and you or a TA can look at it later, right? Maybe use peer review. Peer review can be really helpful in big classes too, whether it's in the moment during the active learning exercise in class, or again, something they work on after class that builds on the in-class activity. So again, you can do all the same, have all the same goals of active learning. You get students engaged, you get the camaraderie, you get that group mentality, you get the gears turning, getting their brains working on their own, but it just looks a little bit different in the bigger classrooms.
Yeah, it sure does. And one thing that I really like about some of these suggestions that you've shared, which I'm inspired, I want to run out and teach a big class as soon as I can, is that these fall into one of my favorite buckets of strategies, which seem like small change, big impact,
There you
right?
go.
So,
Yep.
you know, just like you described, like any questions, put your hand up, crickets. Okay, look at your notes for 30 seconds, right? Turn to a partner and talk. Now, what questions do you have?
Good.
And then finally, like the pump is primed, folks have some thoughts, and the conversation goes totally differently. Or it might go totally differently. You might still have crickets, but at the very least, students are they're activated in a different way, right? Their brains are turned on and they're looking at this material. I think that there are some things when we talk about course design, for example, that it can feel kind of daunting because we think like, oh, I have to redo everything about the way that
Yep.
I've been teaching. And that's overwhelming, like that's super overwhelming. And so I like let's just make one change, try one thing. And then maybe in a couple weeks you try a different thing
Yep.
and see how it goes. And the collecting of the data is crucial for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a couple great points you made there, right? Yeah. You don't have to make a bunch of changes at once. All of you listening, you got a million other fires to put out every day, whether it's your research, your grants, your family, your kids, whatever it is, right? You got too much going on. So the idea of trying to move to a completely new course redesign all at once is very overwhelming. But the good thing about that again is in the literature, you add little pieces at a time, right? You add, just clickers, you add just pre-class reading guides, which I do, you add these other little things, you're going to see incremental benefits. The other cool thing about that, dovetailing on your second point about feedback, right? You can get data along the way. What are your students feeling about these things you've added, right? So if you try active learning, maybe you're adding clickers or you're adding these think, pair, shares or little writing activities, you can ask students explicitly, hey, what do you think about this thing? And you're going to get feedback on that. And then you're also going to get data from, performance, like assignments, exams, whatever, right? And you get to kind of see what the needle's doing as you're trying these new things. But yeah, if you try to do it all at once, you might feel overwhelmed in making these big changes. But that being said, if you're doing a brand new course from scratch, go whole hog is what I say. Do it all at once because, again, we got lots of evidence on this. And then that will be kind of your starting point because we all know with teaching, however you did the last time is how you're going to start the next time. And you're going to build on that model. So you got to build on that pre-existing form. So if you start off with a lot of cool stuff, a lot of moving pieces, well, you can take stuff out then, or you can add more stuff on top of that. But it is a management issue for sure. But doing these things, again, there's a lot of great literature out there. There's a ton of resources online, great centers like yours and everywhere else that support faculty in these endeavors. You will see rewards and benefits, but yeah, you got to spend the time and kind of pick and choose what will work best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I was thinking about, you mentioned scaffolding, and we know all about scaffolding in New York City, but I was thinking about, the scaffolding of like building in these support structures for students in course design. And I'm just thinking of this parallel structure of like, it's almost like building in some course design scaffolding as faculty too, right? Like try one thing, collect data, ask your students how it's going. I've certainly done that. Like, hey, look, this was a new strategy that we tried. I've never done this before. How do you feel like that helped your learning? And I've certainly have students told me, look, I don't love these quizzes that you give us, but 100% if you didn't have them, I might not do the reading as carefully. And they're extraordinarily honest about, the things that they're very grateful. They don't love them, of course, but they're very grateful that they're in place because it holds them accountable. And, it's like having a buddy. Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. This is such a great way to think about going into a new academic year, thinking about ways that we want to engage our students and thinking about ways that we want to help them actively participate in their learning in classes, in medium-sized classes. Our discussion today has certainly reminded me why it is just so very possible to do in large classes. And that's really great. So thank you. We're all very grateful.
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, best of luck to everybody listening as you're starting the semester, or who knows when you're listening to this. But, I just want you to think too about the impact you're having as a faculty, right? I mean, it's sometimes being a faculty member can be pretty, right? You got so much crap to deal with. The public doesn't really value higher ed sometimes, and you kind of might maybe question, like, why are we doing what we're doing? So, but just remember, whether you're teaching a small class or a large class, you got a lot of students rely on you and you're having a positive impact on them whether you ever find out or not. Sometimes students will tell you in the moment, hey, you had 400 of us in the class, but you took some time to try to learn our names. That meant so much to me, right? But maybe it's 3 years later, you get an email from a student that says, hey, I took your class 3 years ago. I never introduced myself to you, but now I'm in medical school because you inspired me, right? So it's those little things that keep us going. And again, when times are tough out there in the world for how higher ed is viewed, just keep your head down and think, you know what, I'm doing this for my students and we're making a difference no matter what our class size is.
Yeah, absolutely. The things we do absolutely matter to our students, for sure.
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, best of luck to everybody listening.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please review our website where you can find any resources mentioned in this episode, ctl.columbia.edu/podcast. Please like us, rate us, and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Dead Ideas is produced by Stephanie Ogden, Lauren Close, Michael Brown, and Sarah Carswell. Our theme music is In the Lab by Immersive Music.